This girl is Michela, sitting beside a beautiful riverbank reading a letter from her brother. It's been 6 months since they were separated. Because he was too lazy to write letters, it's only now that he's finally contacted Michela. Regarding the city where her brother lives, it's a chaotic place, and somehow he has managed to survive there. 6 months ago when he left Michela, he thought of himself as just a grain of sand in the desert. But upon arriving in this city, he realized he had greatly underestimated himself. Today, he writes to Michela wanting to tell her everything about this city, every action, and every friend he's met there. It's a long story, so he hopes Michela will be patient enough to read until the final lines. The story begins about this wretched city, where people fight over the smallest things and pickpockets are everywhere. Part-time wages are extremely low with no time to rest, let alone make friends. The city is surrounded by a strange fog, from which mysterious creatures have begun to appear. However, they don't attack ordinary citizens. On the contrary, they coexist quite harmoniously. Familiarity with the unusual eventually becomes normal. Whether the appearance of these mysterious creatures turns out to be a tragedy or comedy, only time will tell. Meanwhile, this friend of hers is fed up and doesn't want to stay in this chaotic city anymore. A few hours earlier, Watch was peacefully drinking coffee at his usual cafe. Since he was a regular customer, the waitress cared about him and encouraged Watch to reconnect with his family. She then wondered why a young person like Watch had come to this city. Watch immediately showed off his camera, explaining he was a rookie reporter. Watch's stomach growled, making the waitress just sigh. Before becoming a reporter, Watch would likely have starved to death. Even though he was a regular, she couldn't give him free food. At this moment, the cafe owner brought a plate of food for Watch. Of course, nothing is free. For this meal, Watch would have to pay by washing dishes. Watch hesitated a bit, but the waitress encouraged him, saying being humble is completely different from putting yourself down, and there's nothing to be ashamed of if Watch eats and pays right away. Watch happily accepted the plate of food when suddenly a monkey rushed by and snatched his camera, startling him into giving chase. This was a supersonic monkey, so ordinary people like the waitress couldn't see it. Only those who belonged to the mysterious tribes could see it. The strange thing was why Watch could see the monkey. He didn't know himself as he chased after the monkey trying to get his camera back. Watch accidentally got pulled into a bank robbery. The explosion caused both him and the supersonic monkey to fall to the ground. Just as Watch looked up, a foot landed on his face. Whether by accident or luck, this man named Ray was exactly who Watch had been looking for, someone who could give him the answers he came to this city seeking. This is a chaotic city where you can find anything, from the mafia to terrorists, and this guy Zap belongs to an organization called Libra. After a brief encounter, Zap led Watch to his organization. The door opened to reveal 2 people waiting for Watch inside. The fierce-looking guy was Klaus, and the secretary beside him was Chain. The reason Zap brought Watch here was because he had mistaken him for someone named Johnny. After Chain discovered this, Watch became so frightened that he immediately knelt down to apologize. Since they belonged to the underground world, Watch had risked impersonating someone to follow them here, hoping they would help him with something. Just then, the TV showed the bank robber from earlier being arrested, with police surrounding and subduing him. Suddenly, a giant soul emerged from his body and began slaughtering everyone. The TV switched to a masked man. He laughed maniacally, introducing himself as Femt, the king of chaos in this land. Having grown bored with the monotonous life, he decided to organize a small game. A gate would appear in the city, and both humans and criminals would compete to see who could find it first. If the criminal found it first, a very dangerous demon would appear and destroy the city. Of course, this was a fair game, so Femt gave them a hint. Randomly throughout the city, small events would occur as clues. The game began immediately as the supersonic monkey in Watch's possession shot out a soul that sliced through the building where Watch was standing. Fortunately, Klaus reacted quickly enough to save Watch. Zap was very angry, thinking Watch was an accomplice of Femt, deliberately bringing the monkey to kill them. At this point, Klaus signaled Zap to stop. Klaus was quite sure the gate Femt mentioned was the monkey itself, so he had Chain chase after it first, before beginning to question Watch. Just moments ago, he had noticed that Watch could keep up with the supersonic monkey's speed. His eyes seemed different from ordinary people's, so Klaus wanted to hear Watch's request first. Watch bowed his head, apologizing to Klaus for the impersonation, then began telling his story. Everything started 6 months ago. Since childhood, Watch's sister had been unable to move on her own. His parents were always looking for ways to help her, and this mysterious city might have a solution, so Watch's whole family had traveled here. While Watch was secretly taking photos of his family by the lake, a mysterious creature appeared and offered a choice. Either Watch or Michela would have something precious taken from them. Hearing this, Zap grabbed Watch by the collar and cursed at him, calling him a coward for letting his sister face danger. Watch could only cry without resisting because the creature had terrified him. At that moment, Michela had stepped forward to accept everything upon herself. After the creature took something from the little girl, Watch received his new ability. Just as he was telling this part, police aircraft began firing directly at their building. Zap was extremely annoyed. This Fempt was trying to blame everything on them. After hearing Watch's story, Klaus made him an offer. He believed Watch's new ability would be the key to ending the chaos in this city, and he needed Watch's help in that mission. In return, Klaus promised to help fulfill Watch's wish. The police robots had been deployed to surround them. Klaus took on the task of holding them off so Zap could escort Watch to complete the main mission. Klaus stepped forward with his bear-like fist, activated his battle technique, and delivered an extremely powerful blow to the robots, instantly smashing them to pieces. The path was now clear for Zap and Watch to leave. Meanwhile, Fempt was observing their every move. While Libra wanted to protect the world, Fempt was only loyal to his own desires. When Libra let their guard down, he would take over the entire city. Zap put Watch on his electric car and began speeding off to find the monkey. Chain was following it very closely and called Zap to report that the monkey was right in front of Zap's group. They prepared for battle, but just as she finished speaking, an event occurred, causing the bridge they were on to collapse immediately. Watch and Zap tumbled to the ground. When Watch crawled up, the scene around him was nothing but ruins. Even his familiar cafe had completely collapsed. Fortunately, the waitress and the cafe owner were still safe, though trapped in the rubble. As Watch tried to find a way to rescue them, the criminal appeared. When he swung his sword at Watch, Zap rushed to his aid just in time. The supersonic monkey, frightened by the criminal's presence, curled up in a corner. The mission was to take down the monkey to end everything. Zap divided the tasks. He would handle the criminal while Watch would deal with the supersonic monkey. Zap activated his ability, creating a blood sword, and charged at the criminal. Zap was so skilled that the criminal had no way to fight back, so he changed targets to Watch, wanting to take him down first. Of course, Zap wouldn't allow that to happen. Watch was now standing in front of the supersonic monkey. At that moment, he hesitated, not wanting to kill such a cute creature. So Watch activated his ability, maximizing his vision, and discovered deep within the monkey's fur a tiny creature that seemed to be the gate Fempt had mentioned. Watch quickly removed it, infuriating Fempt as Watch's action had ruined his original plan. If Watch had killed the monkey, the real demon would have appeared, rather than things ending as Fempt had said. Everything ended there, and the city returned to its normal days of operation. Though the cafe had been destroyed, business couldn't stop. Watch didn't forget his debt, and instead of taking advantage of the chaos to avoid it, he honestly went to see the waitress, wanting to wash dishes for the cafe. This honorable action made her see him in a different light once again. It had been a month since Watch came to this city. He was just an ordinary person, but somehow he had managed to join an underground organization in the city. This was an organization that maintained the balance of the world. Being underground, Watch had no idea how many members the organization had, but he believed that one day he would find out. Just as he opened the door and entered, he saw Zap jump to attack Chairman Klaus, only to be immediately defeated. Chain appeared right after, and today there was a new face, the butler Altstein. These were all big shots in the gang, so Watch stayed quiet, not daring to make a move. Watch's ability was the Eyes of the Gods. There was very little information about this ability, and Steven had already investigated it. There was no shortage of people willing to do anything to obtain this power. So in his meeting with Klaus, Steven had to repeatedly bring up this issue, hoping things wouldn't end in tragedy. Meanwhile, Watch was working part-time to pay off his debt to the cafe. Instead of washing dishes, he was assigned to deliver pizza to customers. While waiting for a red light, a pair of siblings walked past him, and the girl suddenly fell flat on the ground. Her brother quickly ran to help her up. Coincidentally, the girl was also named Michela, which reminded Watch of his own sister. Soon, he arrived at the customer's house, rang the doorbell to deliver the pizza, but somehow Zap appeared without clothes and stole his pizza. Watch grabbed Zap's leg, demanding payment, but from inside the room, several girls wearing only underwear appeared, making Watch's face turn red with embarrassment. Since Zap wouldn't pay, Watch had to go deliver another order. But strangely, wherever he went, Zap would suddenly appear from a sewer or falling from the sky, and all the pizzas ended up in Zap's stomach. Watch was extremely angry but couldn't do anything because Zap had combat abilities while he did not. On the way back with Zap, Watch curiously asked him about his ability. Zap's ability was called Blood Magic, the same type as Chairman Klaus's, but Klaus's was on a higher level. So no matter how many times Zap exerted his full strength, he could never defeat Klaus. While listening, Watch suddenly hit the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road, confusing Zap greatly. Watch told him to look at the washing machine car across the street. To Zap, it was just an ordinary car, but with Watch's divine eyes, he saw something different, something very disgusting. And at that moment, that person had also discovered Watch. Watch pretended not to know anything and immediately drove away. After confirming that Watch was normal and not on drugs, Zap immediately reported this to Chain, asking her to investigate for him. But there was no way those guys would let Watch escape so easily. They chased after Watch and attacked him. Zap had blocked one hit for Watch but had fallen, losing blood. An ordinary person couldn't see them, so they quickly determined that Watch was the one who could see through Fem's tricks. He was very important to their organization, so for now, they would take him away. With all his strength, Zap rubbed his bloodied hand on Watch's shirt before Watch was taken away. He had done all he could. Now they had to rely on Chain's sensitive nose. These criminals had advanced disguise abilities. Even if Chain stood high up, observing every detail, just a blink of her, I would make her lose track of them. Shortly after, Watch had been taken to their lair, his hands tightly bound. In the lair, many others had also been captured, but unlike Watch, they were considered food, not tools. In this city, cannibalism was forbidden, yet they dared to do it. Now Watch knew how frightening they were. These weren't ordinary criminals. Just then, another one appeared, rushing to Watch, examining his eyes, and exclaiming how beautiful they were, making him want to dissect Watch immediately. Meanwhile, Chain had reported to Klaus that she had lost track of the criminals. Even a wolf person like Chain couldn't track them, yet Watch could detect them, proving that Watch's eye ability was extremely powerful. But that was also a great advantage for the enemy. Back with Watch, the two criminals had gone somewhere, and the supersonic monkey Sonic had somehow stayed by Watch's side. Having a companion there made Watch feel less worried, and then he began to think of ways to escape from this place. After thinking for a while, Watch started to panic. He didn't have any formidable powers, just these keen eyes. Wait, the eyes. Watch immediately thought of a plan. Chain had now gone to the hospital to check on Zap's condition. He was in a very special state, having lost too much blood. But whenever the doctor tried to give Zap a transfusion, the blood would mysteriously disappear, leaving the doctor helpless. After hearing Chain's report, Klaus immediately recognized the problem. If they won this battle, Zap would definitely be the MVP, because Zap had used his blood to track those criminals. Now they just needed to follow Zap's blood trail to find the criminal's lair. Right after that, Klaus's group got in a car and raced to rescue Watch. By this time, Watch had been subdued by the criminals because he had used his ability to project images of the monkey Sonic to tease them. This made them very angry, so they decided to kill Watch right there and steal his eyes. Despite this, Watch remained tough, cursing at them and immediately activating his ability. A vast amount of information that Watch could see through the monkey Sonic was transmitted directly into the brains of the criminals. A large amount of overlapping, intertwined images in an instant overwhelmed them, making them unable to determine what was happening. As a result, the vehicle they were controlling also lost control. That was all Zap's blood magic needed to identify their position. Chain immediately followed Zap's blood trail to rescue Watch. Shortly after, both Chain and Klaus's group arrived at the scene. These criminals were only good at bullying the weak. When facing Chairman Klaus and his terrifying blood battle technique, they were sweating in fear, not daring to resist anymore. With just a single strike, Klaus secured victory for his organization. So everything was over. However, Watch was a bit battered because he had risked his life trying to find a way to escape. Currently, Watch was lying in the hospital, bandaged all over. For this incident, Klaus took responsibility himself. Previously, he had asked Zap to look after Watch, but Zap had refused. Assuming nothing would happen, Klaus had let it be, resulting in such an incident. Klaus bowed his head and apologized to Watch. At this moment, Steven laughed out loud, teasing Klaus that he needed to take a course in how to win friends and influence people. Despite working with Zap for so many years, Klaus still didn't understand his personality. There was no way Zap would directly accept Klaus's request. He only implicitly agreed. The evidence was that Zap had used all his strength to create blood marks indicating Watch's position for everyone to rescue him. Hearing this, Watch also realized why Zap always suddenly appeared in front of him. It was just to protect him. Watch sincerely wanted to thank him for that. But the fact that Zap stole his pizzas was something he couldn't accept. Thinking about it made Watch angry again. In the following days, Watch stayed in the hospital for additional treatment, during which time he didn't forget his dream of becoming a reporter. So he began to go around the hospital taking pictures. Suddenly, Watch found a mysterious area containing a very large tomb. Watch was a bit confused about why there was a tomb in the hospital. Then suddenly, a laugh rang out, calling Watch. A little girl sitting right on top of the tomb began rambling about life and death, how everyone must die, why no one would listen to her. Watch broke out in a sweat at her appearance, then curiously asked about her identity. The girl smiled brightly, introducing herself as White, a ghost, very happy to meet Watch. Watch stared wide-eyed at the girl, then quickly pulled out his camera to take a picture. White appeared clearly in the photo, which confused Watch, since ghosts shouldn't be visible in pictures. Seeing this, White immediately burst into laughter. Watch's actions were more interesting than she had expected, and she was liking him more and more. The next morning, while Watch was sleeping, something clung to his face and woke him up. He jumped up in shock and was even more terrified when he saw a giant monster next to his building. At that moment, the landlord pushed open the door and proudly showed Watch the prize he had just won in a lucky draw contest. With it, the landlord's hotel would attract more guests. To make room for paying customers, he forcibly evicted Watch from the place. So Watch had to take refuge at the organization's office again. Seeing Watch sprawled out on the couch, Steven immediately approached with questions. Altstein explained everything to everyone. After hearing this, Steven wanted to help by increasing Watch's living allowance. Watch had already suffered significant losses during the pizza delivery incident, so Steven wanted to take this opportunity to repay Watch in full. Altstein mentioned he had already suggested this to Watch, but the boy had refused. Just then, Zapp entered the office, said nothing, walked straight to the sofa, and sat right on Watch's face with blood-covered hands. Zapp had just fought with an addict. He had clearly slashed the addict's throat, but somehow the man had survived. Zapp was certain it was a human, but how could the addict survive his attack? Steven happened to have an answer for Zapp. He showed a document about a new type of opium circulating on the market. After humans used this drug, it temporarily altered their physiology. Just a glance and Zapp could tell this drug was very expensive. This was an issue Steven was concerned about. If this drug spread throughout the city, it would cause enormous chaos. At that moment, Chain also appeared with a video recording showing a human who had transformed into a monster after using the drug. Now they definitely had to investigate this case. Steven began assigning tasks to everyone, while Klaus remained focused on finishing his chess game first. At this point, Zapp started noticing the monkey Sonic, who kept staring at him, making Zapp very confused. Gradually, Zapp began to feel something odd under his backside. By the time he realized it, Watch seemed to be almost suffocating. Watch and Zapp formed a team and began spreading out to gather information about the drug. They had investigated everywhere, but the leads were too few. They couldn't get any information about the drug. The only thing Zapp could be certain of was that it came from the underground world. Steven and Chain's investigation hadn't yielded anything additional either. This was when Chairman Klaus stepped in. He drove out to pick up a one-eyed woman with the codename K, bringing her along on the mission. The place they were heading to was a chaotic zone where everything floated around without any rules. Despite this, K remained very calm, showing no signs of fear. While driving along the road, Klaus suddenly stopped the car and approached a group of people in front of a tunnel. This was the car of Champion Olchenko. Klaus quickly advised Olchenko to turn back, saying this place wasn't for ordinary people like him. Olchenko reminded Klaus that he had mistaken him for someone else, then followed his subordinates into the tunnel. To ensure his safety, Klaus and Kay were forced to follow behind. As the group entered the tunnel, they were greeted by three mysterious people. The person in the middle cheerfully greeted Klaus. Kay immediately recognized him as well. This was Don, a boss of the underground world. After exchanging greetings with Klaus, Don got straight to the main issue of the day, Olchenko's appearance. Don didn't waste time with lengthy explanations, but directly conjured a chessboard in front of everyone. This game was called Prosfair, a game similar to chess that Olchenko had prepared very carefully for before daring to come here to challenge Don. At this moment, Klaus spoke up to stop them. Olchenko was a great asset to humanity. If he lost his sanity in this chess match, it would be a tremendous loss for the human world. Klaus tried to beg Don to cancel the match. Of course, Olchenko wouldn't agree after coming all this way. He was very confident in his skills as he stepped forward. Unable to dissuade him further, Klaus could only advise Olchenko not to try to checkmate Don. The two entered a different space, after which they began discussing the prize. Olchenko's request was to have nuclear weapons for his country and to dispose of Klaus and Kay to conceal that he had come here. Don accepted immediately. The game would last 9 hours. If Olchenko could achieve a draw or win before the deadline, he would win, and Don would fulfill his request. In return, if Olchenko lost, he would lose the rest of his life. Klaus and Kay could only wait outside. Klaus had been here 4 times already, but had never been able to defeat Don. This game was easy at first, but its difficulty increased exponentially. Klaus's advice not to checkmate Don was well-founded, as Klaus was certain no one could defeat him. Inside the other space, Olchenko's match had begun. After just a few moves, Olchenko started to feel something was wrong, and exactly 2 minutes later, he was thrown out by Don. According to the agreement, Don had ordered his subordinates to take Olchenko's life. At that moment, Klaus appeared to intervene. He knew this was overstepping, but he still begged Don to withdraw his decision, after playing a chess match with him first. If it were anyone else, Don would have refused immediately, but for a special regular guest like Klaus, he accepted the request. To save Olchenko's life, Klaus would have to play chess with Don for 99 hours. The two entered a different space. At this point, Klaus mentioned another wish that brought him here. He wanted information about that opium drug in the underground world. There was nothing Don didn't know. He just reminded Klaus to satisfy him in the game first, and then he would fulfill any wish for him. Olchenko and Kay stood outside waiting. Time passed, and Klaus still hadn't emerged, which Olchenko found puzzling. Kay, however, found it quite normal Klaus hadn't come out because he still hadn't lost. It was as simple as that. After being crushed by Don, Olchenko had lost his fighting spirit. Don had spent 1200 years just playing this game, so who could possibly have the ability to defeat him? Coming here had been a mistaken decision from the start. Inside the other space, Klaus's match had reached its climax. Don executed a series of tricky attacks, leaving Klaus only able to defend with all his mental strength. The more they played, the more Don found Klaus interesting. Not only did he risk his life just to save a stubborn person like Olchenko, but all of Klaus's requests from the beginning had always been for the balance of this world. Not one request had ever been for Klaus personally. At this point, Don mentioned Olchenko's request. Klaus was risking his life to protect him. Yet before the match began, Olchenko had made a request to eliminate Klaus and Kay. Now that Klaus knew this, Don wanted to hear his reaction. By now, blood was streaming from Klaus's nose, but his moves remained very decisive. Regarding Don's question, Klaus already had an answer prepared. To him, humans were very fragile, and that fragility caused them to act without self-respect. But so what? Klaus didn't care. He was willing to do anything just to save such miserable people. As soon as Klaus placed his chess piece down, Don escorted him out of the space. According to their agreement, Don fulfilled Klaus's wish. Kay urgently took Klaus for emergency treatment and reported back to the team with information about the drug. Thanks to the information that Klaus had brought back from the brink of hell, they finally successfully broke through the network. In the following days, Watch went to the hospital for checkups. He had become closer to White now and shared the photos in his camera with her. White had been stuck here for 3 years, and it was only now that she had someone to befriend, talk to, and share with. This made the little girl very happy. Beautiful days continued to unfold. Watch went down to the subway to carry out a mission. Standing on the train, he witnessed even more types of people, which left him in awe, especially when they could emit light. A guy standing nearby then explained to Watch, in this city, there were many hybrid species. More than 50% were mysterious people, 20% were those not classified into other categories, and 25% were humans. After thinking and calculating for a while, Watch realized there was still 5% unaccounted for. The guy smiled and completed the explanation for Watch. The remaining 5% of the population were people who couldn't be seen with the naked eye. In some cases, these people were particularly dangerous. That evening, a party was held at the organization's office to reward the members for their hard work over the past period, as well as to prepare for the start of a new, stressful work week. The place was suddenly so crowded that Watch could only sit quietly in one spot. Next to him was Patrick, who was much more introverted. Seeing Watch sitting silently, he asked what was troubling him. Noticing this, Klaus also immediately asked Watch how he was adapting to the organization. Watch scratched his head and immediately told everyone about his experience on the subway the day before. He had seen someone with red wings who emitted light. As soon as Watch mentioned this issue, the music at the party stopped. All members surrounded Watch, wanting to hear more about this information. Seeing Watch confused and not understanding what was happening, Zap had to step in to explain. What Watch had just mentioned was a vampire. These were noble creatures emitting deep red light. Only a few studies had documented them. Everything else about this race was very vague. This was a big case, so they had to call in an expert. Just the mention of this person made Zap's face change color. His name was Lucky, a specialist in vampire research in this world. Even Klaus regarded him as his teacher. It wasn't without reason that he was named Lucky. Everything had its cause. As this was mentioned, Lucky appeared on the street, calling loudly for Zap. Immediately, an out-of-control truck was about to hit him, but a monster appeared from nowhere to block the truck. The terrible collision caused glass shards to hit Zap's head. Even Watch, who was just standing beside watching, got hit. Afterward, Lucky carried Watch and Zap back to the organization. The people there weren't very surprised that Lucky arrived this early. According to news they had seen on TV, there had been a plane crash at the international airport recently. Without needing to think further, they were certain it was because Lucky had been there. Now Watch understood why he was called Lucky. He was a person with extremely high innate luck. Nothing could harm him, but everything had its price. In exchange for that luck, a curse would destroy everything around Lucky. It was because of this curse that Zap was very afraid of standing next to Lucky. One could die unexpectedly at any moment. After learning that Watch possessed divine eyes, Lucky rushed over, wanting to see the boy's eyes. Others fearfully dispersed. No one dared to come near Lucky. After greeting all the members of the organization, Lucky got to the main issue. He took out a box containing a hand that looked very eerie. Although only a hand remained, it could still move. This was a very important specimen for Lucky, which he had only recently collected from the Elden 13, a group of 13 people with immortal abilities in the underground world. In exchange for this specimen, 47 of Lucky's agents had died. Although severed, the arm still held a piece of paper very tightly. Lucky believed this was the key to tracking the location of those Elder 13. so he decided to come here so Watch could use his eyes to find the truth. Watch began to activate his ability to see the piece of paper in the arm. It began to glow, and a line of fiery text appeared in front of Watch. Then, immediately after, light spots began to explode around him, causing Watch to collapse from exhaustion. Afterward, they all boarded the subway to find traces of the Elder 13. Having to ride the same train as Lucky made Zap lose years of his life, because every so often, something would try to attack their train. Klaus remained very calm, while Watch, after viewing the information on the piece of paper, still hadn't fully recovered. Their destination was an abyss where no human could descend. Before starting the mission, Lucky assigned the task of filming the report to Zap. In front of the camera, he announced to all citizens that their lifetime mission was about to begin, and now Watch would use his ability to search whether the Elder 13 were hiding in the abyss below. At this point, Lucky reminded Watch that no matter what he saw down there, if he felt it was too much, Watch could stop the search at any time. Watch removed his blindfold and began searching. The light spots continued to pop, but this time they weren't white light, but red light. The Elden 13 wasn't just a team, they were an entire army down there. Too much information for Watch's eyes to process caused an overload. Watch collapsed, his eyes bleeding profusely. Meanwhile, Altstein's group had just called Klaus to report they had received a distress signal from the FBI, who had just encountered an elder in the subway. After receiving the call for help, Steven and Kay quickly arrived at the scene. They didn't hesitate to go inside, as they had been waiting for this opportunity for 3 years. This vampire had the ability to control robots with its own blood, but that wasn't enough to face both Steven and Kay. These puny robots were easily defeated by them, forcing the vampire to step out and fight. The entire scene was being live-streamed by chain from a corner for Klaus to watch. Despite their best efforts, Steven and Kay were quickly overwhelmed by the vampire. Klaus became furious and then asked Watch if, with his keen eyes, he could detect any weaknesses in these creatures. Steven and Kay had now been subdued by the vampire, losing their fighting ability. Seeing they were no match, the vampire approached and began to taunt them. He had expected the secret weapon of humanity to be something impressive, but in the end, they couldn't even inflict a single wound on its body. In this situation, Steven remained defiant and immediately retorted, "Maybe humans couldn't fight vampires yet, but so what? What they had was time to evolve." Steven believed that in 1,000 years, there would be a day when their blades would be at the vampires' throats. At that moment, a subway train approached. It was the train with Klaus's group. Klaus had somehow positioned himself right behind the vampire. He immediately activated the final form of blood magic. He knew he didn't have the ability to kill it now, but sealing it was well within his capabilities. With just a single move, Klaus turned the vampire into a blood key, bringing the battle to an end. When everything was over, Klaus and the others carried the unconscious Steven and Kay outside. Watch followed at the back. Although everyone was safe today, he was still very worried. This was just a confrontation with a single vampire. Earlier, he had seen an entire army in the abyss. If they all attacked at once, humans would surely be doomed. Watch looked up at his teammates, then immediately retracted those thoughts. As long as they were there to protect the world, it couldn't yet reach destruction. He had faith that one day they would destroy those vampires. That night on the subway, Watch remembered the day he met a guy on the same train as him. That guy could also see vampires, making Watch suspect who he might be. Afterward, he went to the hospital to meet White as promised. Meanwhile, the guy who had been on the subway with Watch was communicating with Femmt. It turned out he was the king of vampires, and they were preparing some crazy plan. Watch went to visit White, but for some unknown reason, she was upset with him. Despite his persistent questioning, White ignored him and just sat reading her book. Watch could only sit and watch, reminded of his sister Michela, who would sometimes get inexplicably angry like this too. That made Watch think that perhaps all girls were just like that. Even though he understood this, Watch was still very concerned about the situation. Seeing his younger friend with a long face, Zap guessed that perhaps the boy was hungry. Despite an upcoming meeting, he decided they should fill their stomachs first. Watch protested vigorously, but Zap wouldn't listen. So Watch had to activate his ability, controlling Zap's eyes to force him to go in the direction Watch wanted. The two weaved through traffic, driving dangerously close to a huge truck. They were just a moment away from ending up under the vehicle when another danger struck. The truck was suddenly lifted up, followed by a tremendous explosion right behind Zap and Watch. The incident quickly reached Steven's ears. The thing that had just attacked Watch was the work of a girl named Allegra. Klaus and Lucky immediately headed to the storage room to untie someone named Hammer, then reminded him to escape immediately because this time, Allegra had come to reclaim her artwork, the parasitic blood inside Hammer. Just as he finished speaking, the parasite emerged, threatening Lucky, but there was no way Lucky would fear it. If it dared move even slightly, he would freeze its blood instantly. Meanwhile, Watch and Zap were still running for their lives. The monster swept away everything in its path, and Watch and Zap were right in front of its mouth. The vibrations were so intense that Watch lost his balance and fell off the bike, getting stuck on the giant monster's body. At that moment, a girl stepped out to look at Watch. She immediately recognized him as the owner of the divine eyes. Without knowing whether she was friend or foe, Watch denied everything to gain an advantage. Meanwhile, the Vampire King had a meeting with Aligura's subordinate. Watch was quickly taken by her into the monster and restrained. She began boasting about her boyfriend, who was perfect but extremely ugly. Aligura had been very protective of this until she met Hammer, a person who matched her physical requirements. So she combined the two of them to create a perfect boyfriend, with Hammer's appearance and Deldro's personality. Aligura described each step in such detail that Watch was terrified, desperately calling for Klaus's help. After that, he curiously asked Aligura why she had captured him. Could it be that she wanted to use his eyes to find that boyfriend of hers? Aligura immediately slapped Watch across the face. When it came to her boyfriend, she had to use her own strength to reclaim him. As she finished speaking, she located Klaus's group. Of course, Hammer was also present in the car. As soon as he saw Aligura, all the disgusting memories from her experiments flooded back into Hammer's mind. But he wasn't afraid. On the contrary, he was excited as he transformed and charged to attack her. A full-force punch from Hammer hit the target, but the armor of the monster was too hard. Hammer was blown far away by the countershock, crashing through several buildings to the extent that even the Vampire King, who was eating at the time, became aware of the situation. At this point, he remarked, hoping that Aligura wouldn't get so happy that she would kill Watch too. His divine eyes would be very useful for their later plans. Although the attack wasn't effective, at least it had stopped the crazy vehicle. After that, the entire Libra group came to pick up Hammer, acting naturally without any fear of danger. Along with Hammer's silly personality, that's what attracted women to him. Now Kay understood why that Aligura girl had fallen for Hammer. On Aligura's side, while waiting for the vehicle to be repaired, she got bored and began asking Watch about his love life. Watch knew nothing about love, but when threatened by Aligura, he had to use White as a shield. The more he talked, the more curious Aligura became. Although Watch had insisted that he and White were just close friends, Aligura believed that Watch already liked White. The vehicle was finally repaired and ready to depart. At this moment, Aligura enlightened Watch about love. In matters of the heart, there's no retreating. The one who pushes harder will be the winner, using herself as an example. God and Deldro were also ready to fight. Before leaving, Deldro questioned Hammer. Just earlier, Hammer had not hesitated to attack Aligura. Why did Hammer have to do that? Hammer and Aligura didn't have any relationship. Hearing this, God immediately patted his partner's shoulder in encouragement. He and Deldro shared the same body, so their thoughts would be the same too. The action earlier wasn't spontaneous. Hammer was sure it was also Deldro's thought and wish. The more time Watch spent with Aligura, the more frightened he became by her perverted thoughts. He had to find a way to escape, but the ropes were too tight. No matter how much he struggled, it was useless. At this moment, he received a call from Steven, informing Watch that they were preparing to implement a plan to stop this crazy vehicle. And the first step in the plan depended on Watch. Steven asked Watch to use his ability to redirect the crazy vehicle to another boulevard with fewer people, where the team was already waiting to take action. After just one explanation, Watch immediately understood. He activated his ability, controlling the vision of the crazy vehicle and forcing it to take another route. That was all Steven needed. He appeared, freezing the entire road and the vehicle's wheels, making the crazy vehicle unable to move further, only able to slide on the road. The vibrations from the vehicle stopped, making Hammer and Deldro realize that their moment was approaching. Just before the crazy vehicle crashed into a nearby building, Klaus appeared, using his blood magic to create a blood bridge that sent the crazy vehicle flying directly in front of Hammer and Deldro. Deldro had prepared his power for battle, but incredibly, at that very moment, Hammer poked his head out, demanding an immediate change in plans or they would lose. There was no time to explain anymore, so Deldro had to obey Hammer. They concentrated all their power into one punch at a single point, then released it all on that crazy vehicle. The extremely powerful punch sent the vehicle flying straight into the sky, with millions of fragments beginning to rain down on the city. The casualties were enormous, but at least they had driven that weird vehicle out of the urban area. Watch and Aligura were also in free fall from the sky. Fortunately, Klaus had used his blood magic to create a large net to catch them. This event ended there, with Watch having to go to the hospital again to treat his wounds. Old injuries hadn't healed before new ones arrived. This time he needed 5 more stitches. After the examination, Watch could only sit on a bench, sighing. At this moment, he saw White laughing happily with someone. Although he very much wanted to talk to her, Watch was afraid White would continue to be angry, so he stopped himself. That evening, on the way home, the monkey Sonic resolutely refused to follow Watch, standing firmly in front of the hospital gate. Watch ignored it and wheeled his bike home, but only for a few seconds before he had to turn back, not to pick up the monkey Sonic, but to resolve all the issues in his heart. This time, Watch was more courageous, barging straight into White's room and inviting her to see a movie with him. White was very happy that Watch had suddenly taken the initiative. The two sat side by side watching the movie among many others. While everyone was laughing, White suddenly cried because the movie reminded her of her family. Seeing this, Watch quickly comforted and consoled White, then began talking about his sister. As a brother, Watch always let her take care of him instead. Thinking back, Watch also felt ashamed of himself. White didn't think so. To her, Watch was a very good person. It was because he was good that she became friends with him. This time, it was White's turn to take the initiative. She sat close to Watch, then forced his head to rest on her shoulder. As usual, Watch went to work part-time at the cafe. At this point, his only task was to deliver goods. Today the city was unusually peaceful, making Watch a bit interested, walking and enjoying the scenery. Finally, he had arrived at his destination. Just as he was about to cross the road to deliver food, one person from the group couldn't bear it anymore and rushed across the road, only to be hit by a truck and thrown far away. Watch anxiously ran over to see if he was all right. Despite taking a direct hit, the guy was still in the mood to eat, which was impressive. The truck driver came down to scold the man, saying he had suddenly stood in front of his truck, clearly wanting to die. Watch quickly spoke up to intervene. The collision had already happened, and it was very strong, so at the very least, the truck driver should compensate him. The truck driver, after hearing this, absolutely refused to admit fault. Despite saying so, he still ordered his staff to take a cake from the truck as a gift for the other person, considering it as compensation. They still had work to do, so the incident ended there. Afterwards, Watch went to his organization. Zap was sprawled on the ground with a bloody nose. Just by looking, Watch knew that he had been kicked by Chain for lying in the middle of the walkway. Seeing Watch bring food, Zap's eyes lit up, so he got to eat another meal directly. The two shared the cakes Watch had brought, munching greedily. At this moment, Watch noticed that on the package, there was no longer the Peaceful Man logo. In the past, he had eaten many of these cakes just to collect that badge. Zap found this meaningless. This type of cake was very popular among humans and those from the other world, so there was no way humans would accept sharing their favorite food with those creatures. Zap understood human psychology very well. Although everyone lived in this city, no one was willing to acknowledge those from the other world as part of this society. After finishing work at the organization, Watch went out with White again. Sitting in a cafe, Watch was once again enlightened by her about how this world operates. Since the death of Christ, the world had never truly been at peace. She knew that in both races, there were still good people, although they were just a minority, so it was impossible for them to understand each other. After the meeting with White, on the way to take her home, Watch saw the guy from earlier who had been hit by the truck. He was standing by the road waiting for something, so Watch cheerfully greeted him. The only impression he had of Watch was that Watch didn't give him a cake. At this moment, the two truck drivers from the morning also appeared. They had bought cakes at his request, but the price had been inflated too high, which surprised Watch greatly. After the two left, Watch tried to explain to the other guy, but he had known this for a long time and accepted it because no one was willing to go buy cakes for him. Of course, he could walk into the bakery himself as a customer, but being someone from the other world, stepping into a human shop was like stepping into a different world, so he didn't want to do that at all. Hearing this, Watch understood. He decided that from now on, he would buy cakes for him, so the two began introducing themselves to each other, and their days of joyful play began. Watch and Nedge went all over the city, visiting any place where they could sit. They sat and munched on the cakes Watch had brought. There were many new things in Nedge's eyes. Even Watch's trivial collection interested him. After the two had become closer, they could share about their families. Watch still had parents, but Nedge was different. He couldn't remember anything about his mother. That night, the two truck drivers were on their way back after being squeezed by a creditor. The leader, with a gun pointed at his head, was so scared he wet himself, making the other one quickly put on a mask. This was a humiliation, so the two began fighting in the car, then crashed into Nedge, who was crossing the road. They had let him off once before, but this time it was just when they were angry. So the fat one began venting on Nedge. With each punch he threw, Nedge's body turned redder. Seeing that this didn't seem normal, the skinny one tried to stop him. But it was too late. A toxic gas emanated from Nedge's body, scaring the skinny one so much that he dragged the fat one away, disappearing. The very next day, Chain reported this incident to Steven. At the scene of the fight, all residents in the area had fainted. If it was just ordinary fainting, they wouldn't need to care. But these people had all lost their memories of the past 13 hours. This was a serious case, so Steven also began to feel worried. Just at this moment, Watch arrived at the organization and heard their conversation. He immediately left work and rushed to find Nedge, fearing that Nedge would forget who he was. It wasn't until evening that Watch found Nedge sitting in an alley. Fortunately, Nedge still remembered him. But due to being too engrossed in talking with Nedge, Watch didn't notice the skinny man standing right behind him. who knocked him out with a stick. When he regained consciousness, he saw the skinny one beating Nedge mercilessly. The fat one, watching this scene, was somewhat afraid, trying to ask the skinny one if what they were doing could erase their debt. The skinny one had researched this plan very carefully after what happened with the fat one. He knew that the kind of spores Nedge released caused people around to lose their memory. Now, if they controlled Nedge well, they could go steal and erase all traces, so the two began beating Nedge without mercy. Nedge's body gradually turned red after enduring too much pressure. At this point, Watch couldn't bear it anymore and shouted for them to stop. After hearing the entire conversation, Watch understood the problem. Nedge's mother hadn't forgotten him. It was Nedge who had caused her to forget. If Nedge got angry again now, even Watch wouldn't be able to remember him anymore. Seeing Watch awake made the fat one a bit scared, but the skinny one remained very calm. There was nothing to worry about because just by using Nedge, Watch would forget everything. They focused on continuing to beat Nedge, but Nedge's anger immediately cooled down because he didn't want to forget the beautiful memories with Watch. By this point, Watch was furious. He immediately activated his ability, controlling their vision, causing the two to panic and fall backward. After realizing it was Watch's doing, the skinny one immediately grabbed the stick to deal with him. Watch, with his hands tied tightly, had no ability to resist, could only lie still and take the beating. The blow was so strong that Watch's blood began to ooze out. They could mess with him, but not with his friend. Nedge exploded, releasing mushroom spores in a brilliant flash across the city. After that event, Watch also became one of thousands of victims who lost their memories. Many teammates came to recount everything to him, but Watch couldn't remember anything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. However, out of habit, whenever he went to buy cakes, he would buy 2 portions. This made Watch very curious. Just taking one bite of the cake, fragments of memories began to flood back into Watch's mind, moving him to tears until he encountered Nedge on the road again. Watch began to suspect that this wasn't the first time he had met Nedge. Although he couldn't remember anything more, the two seemed to be very in sync with each other. If they forgot once, they would just become friends again. That evening, Watch went to see White again, and accidentally saw a man sitting next to her. He immediately recognized him as the person he had met on the subway. White called him her brother, so Watch had to politely shake hands and greet him. Seeing Watch so shy and fearful made the man burst into laughter. Now he understood why White always mentioned him to her brother. Watch and Black went to sit at the cafe where Watch worked. It seemed that Black was a bit clumsy. Whatever he touched, he broke. After cleaning up, Watch curiously asked about White's illness. From what he knew, White had been hospitalized for 3 years now. Black cheerfully shared with Watch that White's heart wasn't stable, though lately it had improved a lot. Watch broke out in a sweat, feeling very guilty for taking White out to play like that. If something happened to her, he'd be in big trouble. Black understood his sister very well. Having to lie still in the hospital didn't suit White's personality at all. She was a very strong and lively person, always putting herself at the center of everything. Hearing this, Watch thought she was similar to his own sister. Then Black began complaining about himself. No matter how strong White was, Black was equally weak. At school, he was always bullied, and even now, things weren't much better. Hearing this, Watch immediately slammed the table to encourage Black, using himself as an example. At the organization, he was also often teased by his seniors for being weak and four-eyed, but it didn't matter. This strange encouragement made Black laugh. Just at that moment, waitress Vivian was carrying coffee past Watch when a kid who wasn't looking where he was going bumped into her. The coffee cup began to spill onto Watch, but somehow stopped in mid-air. Black had activated his ability to help him, though it only lasted for a very short time. Black's family had a power called psychic ability. Everyone could control this power well, only Black was weak at it. So in the end, Watch still got the coffee spilled on him. After the meeting with Black, Watch returned to the guild. Today, Zap didn't rush at him, which made Watch curious. He turned to ask Mr. Altstein and Chain about it. Just as he mentioned Zap, Zap called. Watch pulled out his phone to check, only to see Zap with numerous guns and knives pointed at his head. He burst into tears, begging for Klaus's help. Of course, Klaus wouldn't let a member of the guild fall into danger, so he immediately went with Watch to rescue Zap, unaware that this was a trap set by Zap for Klaus. They quickly arrived at the location. The door to the room opened, and shouting hit Watch's ears. Money was flying everywhere, making Watch immediately realize that they were standing in an underground arena. There was no sign of Zap anywhere, only people from the other world placing bets. At this moment, Zap was standing with the arena's owner. He had lured Klaus here to erase his debt with Mr. Osmaldo. As soon as Klaus and Watch entered the arena, Klaus was carried to the stands by others. The host introduced Klaus loudly, causing others to explode with excitement. This was the first time they had seen a member of Libra. After that, the host began explaining the rules to Klaus. It was very simple. He wouldn't be allowed to use weapons, and would fight one-on-one with a chosen fighter. Klaus didn't quite understand, thinking there must be some misunderstanding, and tried to explain to the host that he came here only to save his friend. The host knew that. It was precisely to save Zap that Klaus had to fight. He advised Klaus that it would be best to respect the rules here, or else Zap would eat lead at any moment. After the introduction, Klaus's opponent fighter appeared. A big man named Gregor emerged, standing in front of Klaus, who looked quite confused. Gregor thought Klaus was a soft opponent and began throwing a few punches to provoke Klaus. The betting time began, and Watch quickly integrated into the community, taking the opportunity to earn a few coins by betting everything on Klaus to win this match. As soon as the bell signaled the start, Gregor was knocked unconscious by a creature from the other world. The match lasted only 2 seconds. Klaus's next opponent was that creature. Zap, standing in the waiting area of the stands, could only wipe his face and pray for that creature, then quickly turned to remind Mr. Osmaldo to call the doctor on standby while there was still time. Since Chairman Klaus was an amateur in this kind of boxing match, he wouldn't know how to hold back with his opponents. As Zap predicted, it took only 2 seconds for that creature to be knocked out. The audience's cheers made Osmaldo even more excited. It had been a long time since his underground arena had been this bustling. After finishing one match, Klaus thought it was over and wanted to leave to find Zap, but was stopped by others. One match wasn't enough for them. Klaus would have to fight until they were satisfied or out of money. Watch, uninvolved in this matter, wanted to find a way to leave, but was stopped by Gregor. Just one look, and he immediately recognized that Watch had come with Klaus, and if he had come with Klaus, he must be acquainted with Zap. Hearing this, Watch also realized the problem. He and Zap were the ones who had created this drama. Having been discovered so quickly, Gregor didn't bother hiding anything anymore. He just reminded Watch not to worry about Klaus. Although this was an underground arena, it still had rules, so Klaus wouldn't be in any danger. After that, Watch turned to question Gregor. Why did people here spend money just to see blood? Such scenes happened in the city every day. To Gregor, it was very different. Here, they could freely watch exciting matches. Outside, just one misstep could mean death without even knowing it. Even a fool would know which place was safe, which place was where they could satisfy their desires, and this underground arena captured that wish, so it was established. Here they would fight, not to the death like in the outside world, but with bare hands only. Klaus's matches continued, with one person after another challenging him, but Klaus defeated them all. Even the current champion of the tournament couldn't withstand one hit from Klaus. The stands erupted in emotion. People cried, realizing that coming here today was the right decision. Seeing that this was more than enough to pay off the debt, Zap turned to ask Mr. Osmaldo if he could leave, but couldn't find him anywhere. At this moment, Osmaldo had jumped down in front of Klaus. Osmaldo knew that no matter how many more fighters he brought out, they wouldn't be a match for Klaus. And to satisfy the customer's desires, he personally came down to challenge Klaus. Klaus didn't want to fight anymore and was about to refuse when the host, sweating profusely, stopped him. The fact that the owner himself had come down to challenge Klaus was a very significant point. It meant that the winner of this match would take over the underground arena. Before Klaus could even process this, Osmaldo had already charged in to attack him. After exchanging a few moves, he retreated to assess Klaus preliminarily. His left side was defensive, while his right side could be ready to attack at any moment. This wasn't the way a human fought, but the way a knight fought with a spear and shield. Klaus's aura made Osmaldo even more excited as he frantically engaged in the fight. Zap only observed from the stands. From there, it seemed Klaus was at a disadvantage. But Zap knew there was no way Klaus would lose to Osmaldo, because once Klaus got excited, it was different. Just as he finished speaking, Klaus's left hand stopped defending and switched to attacking. An extremely powerful punch to Osmaldo's head made his head explode, revealing a strange creature inside that startled Watch. He hurriedly shouted, reminding Klaus that it was a vampire. The vampire stretched and greeted Klaus, then explained the current situation. It was only using Osmaldo's body to integrate into the human world. It hadn't killed Osmaldo. Today, it had enjoyed a very good match, so it hoped that in the future, it could meet Klaus again. After that, it grabbed Klaus's hand, flung him up to the ceiling, and disappeared. The overwhelming power of the vampire shocked even Klaus. This was the first time Klaus had fallen so quickly. Zap's eyes lit up. Wasn't this the 1,000-year opportunity to defeat Klaus? So he began to charge at Klaus, only to end up being beaten severely as usual. Concluding the incident, on the way back, Watch saw Black, so he gave Black a ride in his car. Today was Halloween. According to Black, on a day like this, creatures from the other world and humans would become one, and the souls of the dead would also return on this day. Hearing this crazy story, Watch laughed, then reminded Black about the day he first met White. The girl had introduced herself as a ghost, and Watch himself didn't know if she was telling the truth or joking. Finally, they reached the hospital. Before Watch left, Black stopped him to explain that White, his sister, might occasionally say some silly things, but Black still hoped Watch wouldn't look down on her and would continue to be friends with her. Parting with Watch there, Black immediately changed his identity, donning a cloak and changing his hairstyle as he headed to Femp's organization. He announced to those there that the grand main event was about to begin. This chaotic city was formerly New York. 3 years ago, a disaster of unknown origin occurred, later known as the Great Collapse. The Great Collapse was a shocking event, not only in the human world, but also affecting the other world. So the two worlds combined, selecting strong individuals known as pillars. They together created a powerful barrier to prevent this Great Collapse event. Although they had succeeded, the threat still remained. So even to this day, many people were still researching the Great Collapse. That was all Black knew about it. At this moment, a little girl overheard their conversation and jumped in to boast that her parents were also members of the Pillars. Black happily bent down to pat the girl's head. She should be proud of that. Black's parents were also members of the Pillars. However, the things that happened were too crazy, and Black didn't want to go through that again. Zap's workday began very chill. After spending a passionate night with his girlfriend, he went out to buy food to fill his stomach. After that, he went to the racetrack to try his luck. After losing, Zap angrily went outside to complain. Just at this moment, several guys similar to Zap appeared. Seeing that Zap looked easy to bully, they wanted to rob him. It just so happened that Zap was out of money, so he dragged them all into a nearby alley, beat them to a pulp, and took all their money. So now he had money again, and Zap went to the casino to try his luck once more, but ended up losing again. Zap's workday ended like that, and the next day continued the same way. But this time, while waiting to buy bread, a female employee shot a love heart straight at Zap. She was so beautiful that Zap froze and blurted out, "Eat moderately, sleep on time," while his stomach bulged out like a man in his 40s. Only Zap didn't notice. Even Watch just had to look once to judge him. At this moment, Chain appeared, stepping on Zap while telling her story. Recently, her friend had been stalked by someone. Coincidentally, according to the description, the guy looked a lot like Zap. So how should they solve this problem now? Zap and Chain argued fiercely. Suddenly, Zap stopped, and Steven immediately received a phone call. It was an emergency mission that had just been communicated from the headquarters in India. A blood gate carrying a vampire had appeared there, destroying everything, and its next direction was this city. As soon as they received the mission, everyone set out together. Watch, sitting in the car, was a bit worried because the information they received was too little. Steven also felt the same. All witnesses there had already been transformed. Kay quickly found their target. This vampire was fighting with a hunter from India who had chased it all the way here. Their battle was so fierce that innocent civilians around were also affected. Of course, there was no way Kay would let them die like that. She used her body to shield them, and fortunately, Steven had arrived in time, freezing everything falling towards Kay, saving them all. After bringing them to a safe place, Kay and Steven began their main work. Since they didn't know what the Indian hunter looked like, they could only guess based on appearances. Of the two people fighting, one had lost the lower half of his body, so Kay and Steven immediately guessed that the other one was the vampire, so they joined forces to subdue this vampire. Meanwhile, Zap, who had just arrived at the battlefield, was already being chased chaotically by that hunter. After the hunter caught Zap, the vampire had escaped from Kay's control. To do this, the vampire had to cut off a part of its own body. Kay had done enough. The hunter would take care of the rest. The hunter activated his blood technique, creating blood threads connected to the vampire, then transmitted fire and wind to burn it. After a while, the vampire turned into an egg and fell. According to the hunter's explanation, this was the defensive form of vampires during their recovery process. At this moment, Steven formally bowed to greet the hunter. It turned out he was the founder of the North Star Blood Combat School, which all members of the Libra organization used. Mr. Raju. Raju communicated with Steven through Zap. He didn't like Steven at all because a team member who couldn't even recognize friend from foe was useless. Even Klaus was scolded by him. To him, Klaus lacked leadership skills for the team. Then he poked at Zap's fat belly. As a team member, Klaus let this guy do whatever he wanted, with no use other than eating and farting. So Raju decided to take Zap away and retrain him from the beginning. Hearing this, Zap sweated in fear. It took Klaus and Steven's intervention to make Raju reconsider and give Zap a chance. In exchange for the chance to stay with his teammates, Zap had to defeat the vampire in its defensive state. During the recovery process of this race, they would attack anything that came near them with extreme speed. Zap stood looking, not knowing what to do. Raju had drawn a barrier to prevent Zap from running away. Standing inside the barrier, Zap fearfully began to consider an extremely big problem. If he couldn't defeat the vampire in front of him, he would be taken away by Raju for training again. Those hellish training days, Zap had experienced once before, and he didn't want to repeat them at all. The more he thought, the more Zap worried, his limbs becoming weak and unable to focus on the opponent. At this moment, Chain received a phone call from Zap's crush. She wanted to ask Zap out, but since Zap was in training, how could he go? Chain declined the girl on behalf of Zap. Zap's ears perked up when he heard these invitations, and just 2 seconds later, he had defeated the vampire and rushed up to grab Chain's phone, only to receive a slap in the face. There was no date. Chain had done this just to make Zap focus on his work and pass the test. At the hospital, Black was with his sister. There were some things that Black had been pondering over the past time, about the first day he met Watch. At that time, Watch was very surprised and thought he had seen Black on the subway. Black sat down beside White, wondering if he had forgotten something important. Hearing this, White immediately hugged her brother and denied it, saying she was sure Watch and Black had never met before. Even as night fell, the vampire still hadn't been fully dealt with by Libra. To seal it, they needed to know its name. But even with Watch's divine eyes, they couldn't find any more information. This made Klaus guess that perhaps this one had separated another part of its body. Klaus's judgment was entirely correct. At this moment, Raju spoke up to inform everyone. His disciple was bringing that body part to the city. A huge airplane was preparing to land in the city. It had been a long time since the residents here had seen an airplane, so they were very excited and ran to watch. Only Black didn't care. He brought flowers to the grave that White often visited. At this moment, the Vampire King appeared to confront Black. According to their agreement, it could fully use Black's body, as long as it didn't harm Black's sister, White. Hearing this, the vampire immediately denied it. What it did wasn't forcing White. The girl's actions were entirely from her own wish. Right after that, it forcibly took control of Black's body, preparing for the final step of the plan. Meanwhile, White was still lying in her room, remembering the day of the Great Collapse, the day she lost both her father and mother. That evening, the city was still bustling, completely unaware of the impending disaster. Mr. Raju was still staying behind to educate his disciple Zap. The North Star blood combat technique was divided into 2 schools, one controlling fire and one controlling wind. If Zap hadn't been so weak in fire control, Raju would have passed on all his skills to him already. Zap openly complained that learning both schools at once was even harder than finding a girlfriend. On the Vampire King's side, he was still mingling with the crowd along with Femt and Eligura, eagerly waiting for their Great Collapse event. Although the Vampire King had repeatedly boasted about this event, Femt knew full well that he hadn't prepared anything yet. The airplane carrying a vampire had approached the city, but was attacked by an underwater monster, causing pieces of the plane to begin falling. As soon as they received the alert, the Libra organization sprang into action. Klaus, without any explanation, pulled Watch straight down from the building, terrifying him. When they arrived at the crash site, a vampire had appeared. His aura was terrifying, but that wasn't what concerned Watch. Inside that plane, there was still another aura, and this one was completely different, making Watch momentarily unable to find an answer. A gunshot rang out, piercing the vampire's head. It was Kay, who had been positioned on the building across, ready to attack. Right after that, Hammer and Deldro appeared, pulling Watch back and jumping down. On the Vampire King's side, waiting wasn't Femt's style. He was getting a bit bored and decided to look for some excitement. At this moment, the Vampire King spoke up, wondering how much his existence would affect this world. Possibly a lot, possibly not at all. The Vampire King flipped a coin, and he and Femt began to guess. The Vampire King won, meaning Femt would have to follow his direction. The other vampire, despite taking a bullet to the head from Kay, remained unharmed. Instead, he attacked Klaus with great determination. Watch and Hammer could only stand below, watching. Watch was still very curious about the strange light he had seen earlier. It seemed only Watch could see it. Hammer couldn't see it at all, so Watch began explaining it to him. Just at that moment, a large explosion occurred inside the building. White wasn't in the hospital at that time, but had gone outside to play when suddenly her heart attack struck, causing her to collapse in pain with no one by her side. Hearing Watch's explanation made Hammer's eyes light up. He was very interested in that and asked Watch if it was the light from the explosion that just happened. Zap joined Klaus in the battle, running to the plane to see if there were any survivors. Immediately from inside stepped out a man who made Zap freeze, not out of fear, but because his appearance was so funny that Zap rolled on the ground laughing, much to the man's displeasure. After resolving the issue, both drew their weapons ready to fight. This man was Raju's disciple, whom he had mentioned earlier. Looking at the shiny trident he was holding, Zap immediately guessed that this guy's school was wind blood combat. They all focused on that vampire. Even though he had lost his lower half, his power was still terrifying. At this point, if he were to combine with the half they had sealed yesterday, they would all be in big trouble for sure. The vampire gathered his strength and shot a beam of light through the building. At his summoning, his lower half immediately flew down from above, wanting to reunite. Of course, Raju's disciple wouldn't allow that to happen so easily. He used his strength to throw his trident. The rest would be left to Master Raju to handle. But strangely, Raju just stood up there watching, taking no action at all. allowing the vampire to fully reunite his body. Despite this, Zap remained very calm, showing no surprise, because this was also part of their plan. As soon as the vampire combined his body, Klaus appeared behind him, activating his ultimate skill to completely seal him in one go. The event ended, and now Mr. Raju had recognized the skills of the Libra team. As promised, he would allow Zap to continue working with the team, and as an additional gift, he handed over his disciple to Klaus to take care of, then disappeared. The guy named Red was too surprised this wasn't part of the original plan. Shocked, he fainted immediately. On the Vampire King's side, this anticlimactic great collapse ended too quickly, making Femp somewhat angry and accusing the Vampire King of lying. The Vampire King remained very calm and explained that if everything went smoothly, what fun would life be? Upon saying this, Allegra pulled out a pair of glasses from inside her coat. The Vampire King's eyes immediately lit up as he rushed to thank her for her help. A glimpse into Black and White's past. To protect his sister, Black had agreed to let the Vampire King take over his body. As soon as he entered, the vampire adapted very quickly, smiling to greet White and hoping to live well with her in the future. White dreamily woke up after her heart attack. She had been taken back to the hospital by her brother, or rather, by the Vampire King. As soon as he saw White wake up, he approached her, placing in her hand the glasses that Allegra had given him the night before. Then he asked White to take Watch's eyes for him. This was a blood pact. If White carried it out, he would return Black's body. White immediately refused. Watch was a good person. How could she do that to him? Hearing this made the Vampire King somewhat annoyed, and he scolded White. In this game, he held the key, while White was just a player. She only had two choices: follow his orders to get her brother back, or preserve her new friendship at the cost of losing her brother forever. On the Libra side, Watch sat with a blank expression. Seeing this, Klaus approached to check on him. Watch was preparing to write a letter to his sister, but didn't know where to begin. Hearing this, Klaus gave Watch a cake, then mentioned the day he first accepted him into the team, not because of Watch's eyes. As for White, she kept staring at the family photo. She recalled the time when her parents were still around. White and Black weren't their real names, just nicknames her father had given them when he was drunk. Nevertheless, White really liked these nicknames. This was because White and Black were two opposites, very similar to the personalities of the two siblings. White's father thought the same, but only partially, because they were twins, so they must have similarities too. At this point, White's father asked White for a favor. Because they were opposites, there would certainly be unavoidable things in life, and when that happened, when Black did something wrong, White would have to be the one to help her brother come to his senses. Because their parents' only wish was for their children to live happily. Thinking of this, White burst into tears, calling out her parents' names. She truly didn't know what to do in this situation now. As for Black, although his body had been taken over by the Vampire King, at this moment he was sitting by the grave that White loved to visit, laughing loudly, then tears streaming down with Black's emotions. Red became acquainted with the people in the organization very quickly, even going out to eat with Watch and Zap. Just as all three were about to dine, something crashed straight into the building. Watch was about to get hit when, fortunately, Red reacted in time and pulled him to safety. Zap also quickly activated his skill, locking down the object that had just fallen, preventing it from further destroying the cafe. He was even planning to take this opportunity to show off and teach Red a lesson. But strangely, Red was unusually obedient, making Zap a bit annoyed as he walked out. Just then, Klaus had also arrived and asked all three to help him, as he faced an entire army of monsters. A little earlier, before lunch break began, Watch had invited both Zap and Red to go out to eat with him. Zap immediately scolded Watch for being too chatty, questioning why they had to invite Red along. That way, the food would smell like fish. Watch didn't care about Zap's opinion and pulled Red along anyway, telling Zap that if he maintained that attitude, he could just starve. To get revenge on Red, Zap led them to a sushi restaurant, assuming Red would be disgusted and not want to eat his own kind. But it was the opposite. Red actually loved these dishes, much to Zap's confusion. Red then explained to Zap, living underwater meant eating underwater creatures. Ignorant people like Zap shouldn't make such comments. Being so strongly refuted left Zap speechless, so he quickly used the excuse that he was allergic to fish to move on to other restaurants. This time, the group went to a bird food store where the mother bird would digest the food first before feeding it to the chicks. Although it was food being officially sold, watching the shop owner vomit food for everyone made Watch nearly throw up too. So they had to change to other shops, one after another. But each place had dishes that Watch couldn't swallow. Food for monsters, dishes that were too bizarre. They went all around the city, but still couldn't find a restaurant suitable for humans. Watch cried a river of tears, feeling very discouraged. Lunch break was almost over, and they still hadn't put anything in their stomachs. While the group was just chilling, Klaus was still on a mission. Recently, a new mafia family had emerged, gathering up to 1,000 members, all troublemakers. According to the information he received, they had stolen a shipment of battle suits from China. Soon, a major event would erupt in this city. So Lieutenant Law called Klaus and Steven out here to ask for help. After hearing this, Steven still felt somewhat hesitant. But Law knew how to hit Klaus's weak spot, lamenting that if they didn't help, many innocent people would be involved in this event. Immediately, Klaus's desire to protect the citizens rose up, and they accepted this mission. After that, they all set off immediately. As they went, Steven thought it was strange because Law's police group had never asked them to participate in such cases before. Lucky felt the same way. There was something fishy here, but they couldn't know exactly what it was. So for now, they just needed to meet the client. Very quickly, they arrived at the meeting point. This time's client was Angelica from the Lowe's Guild, a guild gathering the blacksmiths who had created the wall surrounding this city. Seeing Lucky formally greeting her in such a ceremonious manner made Angelica somewhat unhappy, so she immediately rushed over to reproach him. It wasn't until Dr. Fixer appeared that she stopped. At this moment, they received a call from Law. He had discovered the location of the battle suit shipment of that mafia, a very large quantity, so they needed the support of the Libra people to handle it. As for Watch, Zap and Red were still arguing very fiercely. Watch couldn't care anymore. At this point, he just wanted something to eat. The gnawing hunger made Watch faint. In his dream, he met the god of cuisine, who reminded Watch not to be so picky about food. Watch immediately had an epiphany. He woke up and suggested to Zap that if they couldn't eat at street vendors, they should go to a restaurant instead. Although a bit expensive, it was okay to splurge occasionally. A table full of delicious food was set before them. Before they could even wish each other a good meal, a girl broke the glass window and stormed into the restaurant, causing a scene of jealousy, turning Watch's meal into a mess again. Unable to eat anything, the three, with downcast spirits, tried to find another nearby eatery, but it wasn't much better as that place had just experienced a horrific massacre. On Klaus's team's side, after receiving the location Klaus sent, Chain had gone there alone to check, but it seemed the information they received was wrong. There was nothing related to that mafia there, just one otaku pervert who had passed out while playing games. Watch's faith in this lunch was truly gone. No matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't do any good anymore. Watch sat in a corner, dejected. It had been a long time since Zap had seen Watch show such an expression, so they had to go back to square one. Zap and Red dragged Watch to the cafe. Although it mainly sold beverages, the hamburgers served there would at least help fill their stomachs. As soon as they received the order, the manager immediately got to work, encouraging Watch as she did. Initially, when Watch used to come here to eat and drink for free, he was all alone, but now Watch had friends to accompany him, something to celebrate for Watch. Very quickly, the food and drinks they ordered were served. Watch burst into tears looking at the plate of food on the table. Just when he thought he could finally satisfy his hunger, the opening scene of the episode appeared. Klaus's group went to intercept the mafia, while Lucky had to stay with Dr. Fixer. This time, he had called Lucky here because the city's barrier had been damaged. Normally, he would easily fix it, but this time it wasn't so simple. They had established this barrier 3 years ago, but during the deployment, a creature had infiltrated the city. Evidence was that a couple of blacksmiths had been eliminated by it. At this very moment, on the street, the Vampire King was leisurely strolling when he bumped into a girl who was very panicked because she was being chased by 2 thugs. Since the Vampire King was bored, he used these 2 thugs as toys. He gave them 2 choices: guess his name correctly and he would catch the girl for them, or guess wrong and they would die. Of course, these guys wouldn't be scared until they saw blood. They threatened the Vampire King back and immediately died without a trace. That afternoon, Watch had a meeting with White. Red accompanied him, but Zap didn't because he had just developed diarrhea. Red only sat with Watch for a moment before leaving to visit Zap, giving Watch and White time for a private date. This time, White had led Watch to the chapel, another place she frequently visited. Here, Watch curiously sat down and asked White why she had claimed to be a ghost when they first met. White's expression saddened. She hadn't yet explained when the Vampire King appeared. To him, everything White did was only for herself, just to save herself. Truly out of options, White looked up at Watch, then mentioned his divine eyes, saying she would take them. White's family had long possessed an ability called blacksmith. They used this power to create good things for the world. Only White was born in the clan without any power at all. This made White extremely troubled. She felt like she was something to be discarded in the clan. But White's parents didn't think so. For them, as long as White lived healthily, that was enough. Despite being loved by her parents, White was still very sad. She only wished that her parents could frankly state her uselessness. That would be much better. Their love for her only made her more miserable. Unlike White, Black had all the essence of the clan. Since he was young, whenever Black cried, everything around him was nearly destroyed. When he grew up and went to school, Black didn't use that power when he was bullied. This made White very curious, so on the way home, she asked Black why he didn't fight back against the bullies. Black just smiled, apologized to White profusely, then used the excuse that he wasn't very good at fighting. This made White very angry, and she walked away, not caring about Black anymore. Black still ran after White, both apologizing and thanking his sister for caring about him. During the next period, White researched the clan's abilities. She discovered that supernatural powers weren't omnipotent. If used too much, they would make the body tired, and more severely, could even take away their lives. At this point, White wondered if this was the reason Black didn't want to use his power, or if the truth was that Black was just a coward. So White took her curiosity and told her father. Hearing this, he immediately laughed and denied it. He was certain that Black wasn't the type of cowardly boy White imagined. Black's life was Black's choice, and he fully supported all of the boy's decisions, even if Black didn't follow the clan's legacy to become a blacksmith. At this point, her father reminded White of a major event in the past, an event that had made Black become who he was now. White couldn't remember anything about this event at all, so her father was about to call Black to tell the story himself. But White stopped her father, not wanting to know more. Her father and mother always made the entire clan proud whenever they set out on missions. This action of theirs was very cool to White. She also wished she had powers like them, to be able to sacrifice herself to protect people. But dreams would forever remain just dreams. White didn't have the power to do that, so she wondered what she could do. So White began searching for an answer. In the storage room, White found an old camera of her father's, so she began taking many photos and pasting them on the wall at home. It wasn't because White liked taking pictures, she did it simply to preserve memories. In the following days, when White brought the camera to school, the bullies robbed her of it. White cheerfully handed it over to them, but Black couldn't accept it, so he immediately chased after them to get the camera back. The bullies then threw the camera down from the bridge. Without hesitation, Black jumped after it, catching it, and then fell straight into the water. It wasn't until evening when Black regained consciousness that he saw White falling asleep beside him. At this moment, White burst into tears and scolded Black. "You have your own powers, so why don't you use them? Use them and protect yourself. If Black dies, how will White live?" White cried even louder, making Black also flustered. Then the two siblings cried their hearts out together. Afterward, when they returned home, Black also explained to White the reason why he didn't use his power. He had to recall a memory from years ago when they were still small. White and Black were playing a game of molding clay balls. White's ball was perfect, while Black's was ugly. At this moment, jealousy rose in Black, and he used his power to destroy White's ball. He expected White to cry after that action, but no, White just stood looking, and before Black could realize it, she had turned away and continued to mold another ball. That was the moment Black felt most ashamed. So Black had decided not to use this power anymore until he truly became stronger. At this point, the two kids burst into laughter. Before, White had reminded him to use his power for the right things, and Black believed that getting the camera back for his sister was right, even though the camera was now lost. But Black still had one photo kept as a private memento, so he took it out to show White. This was a photo he had secretly taken while White was sleeping. It was very bad and blurry because Black didn't know how to use the camera, but it made White emotionally cry. She hugged Black tightly, thanking him for what he had done. So the misunderstanding between the two siblings ended, and they became closer to each other, and a promise was formed between the two siblings. With White's encouragement, Black followed in his parents' footsteps to become a blacksmith. There was no need for a big body or superior powers. A heart was enough, and White promised to be by Black's side whenever he needed her. Then the big event that took away their parents' lives approached. To protect his sister, Black had handed over his body to the Vampire King. Now, the opportunity to bring him back was right in front of her. White couldn't miss it. She couldn't live in a world without him, so she could only apologize to Watch. After that, White stepped forward and put the glasses the Vampire King had given her on Watch, who immediately fainted and was dragged away by the Vampire King. He was very pleased with White's actions. She had acted correctly because all humans would eventually die anyway, but he was different. He was someone forgotten by death. Everything he did was just to give himself a grand death. At this moment, Watch regained consciousness. The Vampire King had prepared everything. On the ground was a huge magic circle. He didn't waste time and got straight to the main point. Using the device worn on Watch's eyes, he could use the Divine Eye's ability to activate a giant magical array leading directly to the city out there. At this moment, White sat on the rooftop like a soulless person, looking at the photos in the camera that Watch had left behind. Sonic the monkey, not seeing Watch anywhere, hurriedly ran to White to inquire. Seeing Sonic made White feel even more guilty towards Watch, so she made another decision. Whether Watch could survive would perhaps depend on Sonic's help. Right after that, White's heart attack struck. She fainted just as the Vampire King appeared. White's heart attack wasn't simply a disease. White wasn't human, and the barrier in her heart was what kept White alive. After that, the Vampire King took White back to the chapel, said a simple goodbye to White, and placed the gun on her heart. Outside the city, the second great collapse, arranged by the Vampire King, was occurring. Dust, smoke, and explosions filled the sky. Fempt stood on the building, happily observing this chaotic scene. Since the day that Monster appeared, every day for Watch had been a nightmare of fear that couldn't be erased, a lingering feeling of guilt. And today was a day like any other. Watch still woke up, but had no satisfactory answers. White was also dreaming about her peaceful past. She would never forget that time, and every time she woke up, she blamed herself for remembering that dark memory. Watch was still immersed in his stupor, wondering how to end these days now. At that moment, Fempt appeared, welcoming Watch to the new world. Seeing Watch not reacting at all, he tapped hard on his head to check. Indeed, Watch was still alive, though Watch didn't think so and denied that he was still alive. Today was a day when the entire city was engulfed in fog. The Vampire King's video had spread everywhere, but no one was particularly afraid because they had already gone through one great collapse and were ready to deal with the second one. Zap and Red at this time had already set out to find Watch. Unlike usual, today Zap wasn't hyperactive at all. He just stood in a corner, puffing on his cigarette, looking very contemplative. Meanwhile, Klaus had also received a report from Steven. Watch had sent a notification to the team and was waiting for the sorcerers to fix the barrier in the city. Steven stepped beside Klaus. It had been 3 years, and finally, they had to face the darkness once more. Deldro was very excited because he was about to experience a period similar to 3 years ago. Unlike Deldro, Patrick was very serious because he knew that by now, Watch had been captured by the enemy. Lucky was quite sure that Watch was still fine because the gravity of the city hadn't changed yet. 3 years ago, when the first great collapse occurred, a large black hole had appeared right above them. On Klaus's side, he was still continuously updating information. The blacksmiths were all present in the barrier area, trying to reinforce it, but due to the incident 3 years ago, a part of the barrier had disappeared. They were certain that White's parents had been involved in this mess, and White was the one who had carried that barrier, living until today. The Vampire King had just woken up. He looked around but didn't see White anywhere. On Lucky's team's side, they had also figured out the problem. The little girl White was the one carrying the barrier, so the Vampire King might want to use Watch with his divine eyes to find that barrier. In short, without Watch here, neither they nor the Vampire King could do anything. The time for fun was over. Fempt made Watch wake up. Who he was wasn't important. Watch only needed to know that he had known Watch from before. Compared to when he first met Watch, today he was much more tattered. And being so tattered, he had to ask Watch if he still had the strength to save this world. So he let Watch decide his own fate by playing a game heads or tails. If Watch guessed correctly, he would let Watch leave. If wrong, Watch would have to die and rot in this place. Seeing that Zap didn't show any concern for Watch at all, this made Red very puzzled and questioned him. Could Zap be so heartless? Hearing this made Zap somewhat annoyed. He slammed on the brakes, grabbed Red's collar, and enlightened him one last time. They were Libra, and in any case, they were always ready. After meeting Watch, Fempt returned to the Vampire King. Seeing him there, the Vampire King understood that he had let Watch leave. Fempt accepted that, because Watch had refused the game he proposed, for a very simple reason. He didn't have time to play this silly game. Kay and Chain, after investigating, had discovered a clue. The Vampire King's video was shot at the cemetery of the hospital. Then they went to inform Klaus's group and Zap to prepare for action. Watch, at this point, was still dragging himself back to the ground. His vision gradually darkened. During this time, he remembered Klaus, apologizing to him for being so useless. It had been 3 years since the collapse day occurred. The Vampire King had witnessed that chaotic scene, and throughout these 3 years, he had dreamed of a day like this happening again. Hearing this, Fempt stepped forward to give him a flower, along with advice to just do whatever he liked, and Fempt would always support him. After saying this, Fempt disappeared, and the Vampire King had completed his final step. Today, he would bring despair to this city. Following Watchman's summons, the city immediately fell into chaos. Skyscrapers collapsed due to earthquakes, followed by numerous zombies appearing to attack people. The situation was already very critical, so under Klaus's orders, the members of Libra began to divide to protect the citizens, and their ultimate goal was still to find where Watch was. Fempt's group still sat in a corner, just watching the good drama. They knew this was just the opening act. The second great collapse hadn't officially reached its interesting part yet. After activating everything, Watchman returned to the chapel, where he stood, raised high into the sky. It seemed Klaus had also discovered this. At this moment, Klaus's disciple called to report. She had found the location of the Vampire King. All the blacksmiths were trying their best to maintain the barrier for the city, so no one had spare time to help Klaus anymore. Whether they could stop the Vampire King or not completely depended on Klaus's Libra team. At this moment, Watch had made it to the ground. Looking at the chaotic scene of the city made him just scream loudly to release his emotions. At that moment, Sonic the monkey rushed in front of Watch, carrying Watch's camera, which contained a video recording of White asking everyone to save Watch by all means. Now Watch had rested enough. Today was the day he would find the answer. The day he would escape his own uselessness. Watch stretched and activated his divine eyes. He had found the Vampire King's location and rushed off immediately. On the way, he met Lucky's group. At this moment, Lucky told Watch everything. The information that White was the barrier, Watch had known for a long time. As for the next mission of the organization, without Lucky's explanation, Watch also understood. White was trying to restrain the destruction for this city, and no one knew how long the girl could hold on. So before White was exhausted, they needed to find her. So Watch rushed off once more. On the way, he met Hammer and Deldro. When they learned that Watch needed to get to the Chaos Tower in the middle of the city, Deldro didn't hesitate to help Watch go a part of the way. He grabbed Watch and used all his strength to throw him flying. At this moment, Chain appeared, confirming that Watch was fine. She reported to everyone, and Watch was pulled down to the ground by Red. Watch was in a hurry, just thanking Red and running away immediately. But this time Watch was pulled back by Red. A normal person like Watch going to that Chaos Tower was too risky. Under normal circumstances, they definitely wouldn't let Watch go. But this time was different. After spending time with Watch, they had confirmed that initially, Watch was just a weak person. But humans, if they go through more dangers, become stronger. So if this was Watch's decision, they would also wish Watch a safe journey. On the Vampire King's side, he was still waiting at the chapel. The first person to arrive was Klaus. He wasn't the person the Vampire King wanted to meet, so the Vampire King drove Klaus away. Of course, Klaus would refuse, because he came here to find a boy named Black, not the one who was occupying the boy's body. Watch ran like crazy on the road. There were many explosions blocking his way, but Watch didn't stop. The arduous road was still very long, but thanks to the silent help of Steven and Kay, Watch could still overcome it. On the Vampire King's side, facing Klaus, he remained very calm. Some rocks fell down to where he was. Seeing that he had no intention of dodging, Klaus rushed to shield him. It was this foolish action of wanting to protect others that had attracted Watchman to stay in this world. So let's see how many people Klaus could save. Watchman activated his power and rushed to fight with Klaus. On Watch's side, due to using his power too much, his eyes were gradually overloaded. Without the divine eyes, how would Watch overcome the next stage now? Especially when there were some zombies approaching him. At the most critical moment, the hero Zap appeared, saving Watch's life. It said he saved him, but Zap's attack almost took Watch's little life away. After that, Watch knelt down and complained to Zap. Without the divine eyes anymore, how could he continue the journey? Hearing this made Zap very angry. He drew his sword and pointed it at Watch's face. Those eyes were just a tool. Watch was a member of Libra, so he must be a person with ability. So as long as Watch continued to move forward, the road would never close. After saying this, Altstein drove up to pick Watch up and leave. The battle between Klaus and Watchman was very fierce. But no matter how seriously Klaus fought with all his might, he was still no match for him. Finally, the chapel couldn't withstand their power and collapsed. Klaus was also in tatters, but Watchman still wanted to continue fighting because he knew that someone would come to save Klaus's life anyway. And just as Watchman had predicted, at this moment, Watch appeared, severely criticizing his actions and attitude. Disregarding others' lives was very trashy. Watchman still didn't care. He was like that. So how would Watch stop him? Would he use those eyes to kill him? Watch also didn't know if this was the right action or not, but in that situation, he had to do it. Watch tilted his face to the sky, took a deep breath, and promised Watchman that the next time they met, he would give him a satisfactory answer. After that, he activated his power to look into Watchman's body. With the divine eyes, Watch saw Black's figure. The boy was crying, not wanting to die in such an insignificant way. That was enough. Watch had grasped Black's wish. So he shouted loudly, calling White's name, telling her that her brother hadn't given up yet, and White also needed to be as strong as him. Following Watch's call, even though White was unconscious, she could hear it. When White dreamily woke up, Watch was already standing in front of her. He sat down and told White everything about how Black still had the will to fight, still had the desire to continue living. Watch knew White wasn't human, but White had considered Black as a brother. So at this moment, the only one who could save Black was White alone. After saying this, Watch rushed to Watchman, grabbed his collar, and delivered a powerful headbutt. Taking advantage of the moment when Watchman wasn't paying attention, he activated his power, linking his vision to him. This allowed him to see the image of White approaching him. Black's consciousness then rose up, forcing back control of the body from Watchman. They had a short time to talk with each other. Despite meeting his sister again, Black wasn't happy at all. Whatever happened to this world, he didn't care anymore, because a world without White in it, Black didn't want to live. White immediately hugged her brother and burst into tears. Black shouldn't think like that. even if she disappeared. The truth was that she was still a barrier in the city where Black lived. So Black must definitely live to compensate for the part of their parents' lives as well as her part. White's power began to emanate, making the blacksmiths also receive the information. She was the final piece of the barrier protecting this city. The two siblings, White and Black, hugged each other tightly. As White wished, Black would use his blacksmith power to return White to becoming a part of the barrier for this city. White, until the final moment, still gave Black a smile, promising that there would be a day when they would meet again. White's body glowed brightly and then disappeared in front of everyone. At that moment, the final barrier signal was connected to the remaining barriers, and the second great collapse officially ended. Watch brought his sad face before Klaus. He only needed to arrive 1 minute later, and perhaps he would have had to carry Klaus's body back. But even so, Klaus still had to thank Watch. Thank him because it was he who had saved this city. So Klaus hoped Watch would be proud of his action. Hearing these words made Watch immediately burst into tears. Black just sat on the side and smirked. It seemed that the hero of the two siblings was a bit weak, and that was the ending in the letter Watch sent to his sister. Perhaps currently, he could only send letters to her, but Watch promised that one day, he would stand in front of the little girl and tell her all about his journey.